How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to our VMware NSX-T series where we are doing the NSX-T lab build-out section. It's going to be a lot smaller than the data center portion. So in this video, we're going to discuss the actual install process. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this left side of the screen here. So far all we've done is license NSX-T and added vCenter Server as a compute manager. That's it. We haven't even verified what we've learned from vCenter. So what we're going to be doing in here is going through a variety of different steps in order to get everything working the way we need it to. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the config. I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way and walk you through what we need to do. So what I'm going to do here is click on the System tab, and we're going to go to Fabric, and then we're going to go to Compute Managers, just to verify that it's still good. Registered up, everything looks great. Okay, so I'm going to go to Nodes. I'm going to click down this little drop down arrow and go to DC1 vCSA. Okay, so it sees the clusters, and it says 2 hosts not configured, 1 host not configured, 3 hosts not configured. If I was to turn these out, you would see all of the hosts that are configured. Okay. Right now, the only host we're going to be able to do anything with is going to be ESXi4 because he's on the correct version of ESXi. So what I'm going to go do is the very first thing that we need to. I'm going to do just the basics of the configuration. Now, going back to our diagram, which is this guy right here, we are going to do just the basics. I'm going to create, because the first thing I'm going to do demonstration-wise is going to be the VLAN back segment, to where we're going to be able to leverage the VLAN back segment as a connection point for all of the devices that are attached to our environment. So what that means is I'm going to come over here to Profiles, and the first thing that I have to do is create an uplink profile, because remember, we have 2 network adapters on host 4 that we're going to work with. You have a bunch of different profiles available to us. We have the NSX-T default load balance uplink host switch, the default uplink host switch profile, where we've got active uplinks are going to be, this would be a load balance source. We're going to have 4 uplinks, and we're going to load balance traffic across all 4 uplinks. We have failover order, where we're going to have failover. Uplink 1 is active, uplink 2 is standby. We're going to have failover where there's a lag or a link aggregation group. Load balance source, where we're going to have only 2 uplinks, and then failover order uplink 1, where there's only one single NIC. Now, you'll notice that over here on the right hand side, we've got transport VLAN. This is what I was referring to in the previous video, where you're going to need a VLAN for communication to the outside world. Now, we're actually not going to be needing a transport VLAN for, or sorry, we'll need a transport VLAN for communication. However, the overlay is really what uses a transport VLAN for communication. So there will be IP addresses that will be used for overlay networking. But we're still going to need a transport VLAN in order for this to work. So I'm going to be using 172.31.100 or 170 as the transport VLAN, or the subnet, and VLAN 170. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new profile. This one here is just going to be NSX-T-uplink profile, something very unfascinating. And then when we get down here to teaming, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from failover order, as the default teaming policy. I mean, you could create one and say, let's say this is going to be the team policy. And over here, we're going to do failover order. We're going to change this to be load balance source and the active uplinks. You have to specify what they are. So on host 4, we're going to look at this. We're going to go to configure. We're going to go to physical adapters, and we're going to have VMNIC 6 and VMNIC 7. So I can come over here and I can say active uplink is going to be VMNIC 6. I'm sorry, take that back. Be uplink up-1 and then up-2. Okay. Now the transport VLAN is important. We're going to say 170, and the MTU here is going to be 9,000. Now it says for NVDS, if left empty, the default value will be 1600. MTU is not applicable for VDS. We'll talk about that more in detail when we get into 7.0 code. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add, and over here is Active Uplink. That's funny. I can't delete it. I can clone it. So I never actually do this. I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy. I'm going to go ahead and say that it is load balance source, and I'm going to say up-2 and up, and then up-2, just like that. Close that error out. I'm going to go and click on Add. There we go. Now it's been added. It's my own profile. It's the default. You can't get rid of the default ones. Well, maybe you can. Okay, you can. Okay, so normally I never do. So we have that one in place. So I have an uplink profile now. If I wanted to do a transport node profile, this is where I would do it. And then you'd go through the build of it. I'm going to go back to nodes. I'm going to click on this guy. And this is not a transport node. Do you want to configure NSX to make it a transport node? Yes. Here's the name. I'm going to click Next. And the first thing that I have to do is determine what kind of VDS it's going to be. So this is a new node switch. So I'm going to go ahead. It's going to be a standard switch. The mode is in standard, meaning that, let's see if I can, it says this mode applies to all hypervisors. There is the ability of doing enhanced data path and stuff like that, but we're not going to be worried about that right now. The name of the switch is going to be NSX host switch, so I'm just going to come over here and type NVDS, N-VDS, and the transport zone. Now, we haven't configured a transport zone yet, but what does that mean? The transport zone effectively is going to be the best way to put this. It's not a security boundary, and that's at first that's what I tried to correlate it as. It is going to determine which hosts can talk to which other hosts. Think of it like it's a boundary, right? There's really no other way to put it than that, but it's not a security boundary. It doesn't prevent traffic from coming in and out, but it is going to be a boundary that you're going to allow NSX-T communications via. So if you don't add a transport zone to a particular node, for example, let's say you don't add the overlay transport zone to the deployment of your NSX-T deployment, then you'll not be able to leverage overlay transport zones. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later, but the idea is the transport zone is going to dictate which hosts can participate in that particular transport zone. There's two of them. You have VLAN back segments, or VLAN transport zones, and you have overlay transport zones. VLAN transport zones operate identically to regular VDS port group VLAN IDs. The only difference is NSX enabled capabilities versus non-NSX enabled capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way here. So we can create new transport zones, or you can use the default, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a new transport zone. I'm going to just call this VLAN-TZ and click VLAN. Click on Add. There it is. So that's the only one that it's going to work for right now. The NIOC, Network I/O Control, is only applicable to 7.0. I'm not going to even worry about that. Uplink Profile. We're going to click down here. We're going to choose NSX-T Uplink Profile. And then we're going to see LLDP Profile. We're going to go ahead and say Enabled. Now the teaming policy uplink mapping. If I've done everything correctly and there's available network adapters on the hosts, when I click here on the little pencil, I should get a little pop-up. It's actually polling the host to say, okay, which VMNICs are available. If you didn't have VMNICs available, this would not show up. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click on here. Now, you do have the ability of doing a physical NIC only migration, and you could do more advanced things with this if you want to. We're not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish. Now, that's actually going to start to do the installation. So we're going to say preparing the host and all that type of stuff that's going to end up happening. Now, I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to go to TCP/IP configuration. Right now, nothing is configured. Nothing's going to happen. Once the install process happens, and we start to refresh this, you're going to start seeing things show up here in the TCP/IP config. You're going to see hyperbus, you're going to see an IP address, all that type of stuff is going to start showing up. So it'll take some time for it to push. We're already at 18%. This does go by pretty quick, and we'll see some available capabilities and things like that as we're going along. So this will keep refreshing every so many seconds. And then we should see once it, and here we have communication coming in from NSX management right here, talking to this host. Nothing is showing up here, but once this process gets a little further along, we should start to see stuff show up here. And when it does, we'll start to see the information pop up right there. So we're already at 18%. It'll continue to climb. I'm going to go ahead and pause until it's a little further along. Okay, so like I said, you're going to see some stuff show up. So we're going to see the NSX hyperbus, we're going to see the NSX overlay, and all that stuff that goes along with it. So we're going to be able to see some details come through when stuff comes in. So we're already some information is coming across, but it's going to take some time for that to finish up. So we're 18%. We're not going to see anything happen with virtual switches right away, because the fact that the virtual switch hasn't been pushed yet. We're not far enough along in the deployment. Okay, we're at 68%. I'm going to come back over here to TCP/IP config. The additional stack is there. If we go to virtual switches, now the NVEDS is showing up. We can expand this out. We can see VMNIC 6 and 7 have been added to it, but you'll notice there's no port groups, and that's expected because we haven't created any segments yet. And the NSX deployment is now complete. We can look right here. We can see that the NVDS has been added of type NVDS. It's using the NSX-T Uplink profile, and we're attached to the VLAN TZ transport zone. So that's all there really is to it with that. So we go back over here. We can come to TCP/IP config. We'll go ahead and refresh this. There's really not a whole lot going on here. So we're in really good shape at this point. So with that being said, the next phase of the process would be to do the cluster. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that real quick, and I'm going to show you the failure. So if you need to do this, this is where you would do it. Now I have to come back over here to profiles, and I will be using the NSX-T uplink profile. I'm going to go ahead and click on transport node profiles. And I'm going to go click add profile, and the name of the profile is going to be tn-profile. We're going to be using an NVDS standard mode. We're going to call this n-VDS. The transport zone here is going to be VLAN transport zone. You can apply more than one transport zone if you'd like. Uplink profile we're going to use is going to be NSX-T uplink profile. The LLDP profile we're going to go ahead as enabled. And then what we're going to have to do here, if you notice, there's nothing here because this is a transport node profile. It's going to apply differently. Now, this is where you would need to do a little bit of homework to figure out what NICs actually need to get mapped. So if you have a mixed bag of which NICs are available and open for the NVDS to take, let's say it's 4 and 5 on some and 6 and 7 on the other, you're going to have to correlate them to be the same across the board. Or I have had customers take, if they're not willing to change their physical networking, which does happen, they will take some of those hosts and they will create new clusters and take whatever is going on with a specific set of hosts, they will move those hosts into different clusters that have light networking capabilities. So the same VMNIC availability in one cluster and the same with another. That's a rare thing. It doesn't happen on a regular basis. It does. I've had one customer that had a kind of a mixed breed of what network adapters were available, and we had to make a couple different profiles and adjust the clusters. But fortunately for me, the clusters were already they were already grouped together accordingly. So they had cluster 1 had the right network adapter mappings across all the hosts in that cluster. Same thing with the other cluster. We just made two different transport node profiles and adjusted it from there. But we need to make sure that on all these hosts, on the physical adapters, that we have 6 and 7 across the board available. So I'm just verifying that 6 and 7 are available across the board. So when I come back here and I type in with the pencil, I type in VMNIC 6, and I come down here and I type in VMNIC 7 and do that it's going to work the way we expect it to. I'm going to go ahead and say add. So that's the profile. Okay, so it's only the VLAN transport zone right now. The IP address assignment right now is DHCP because I don't have a pool attached to it. Now, the pool technically only applies to overlay, and I'll show you where that would come into play. Let me go ahead and come back over here to the networking tab, and down here in IP address pools, I'm going to go ahead and create an IP address pool. I'm going to call this the TN pool, or transport node pool. I'm going to click set the subnets. Instead of doing a subnet, not an IP block, I'm going to do a range. I'm going to come in here and type in 172.31.170.11 through 172.31.170.20. Let's do 30. Click outside of that. That's going to set it. The CIDR is going to be 172.31.170.0/24. The gateway is 172.31.170.1. DNS server is 172.31.1.253. I'm going to go ahead and click on add. Okay, so we're good to go there. I'm going to go ahead and click apply and then save. Now I've created the pool ahead of time, and if we click on that, now it's initialized. If we go back over to system, and then we go to profiles, and I go to transport node profile, and I click over here and click on edit, I can change how the policy is mapped. So right now, if you look at how it's connected, you actually have to go here and add overlay. The moment you say overlay transport zone, the IP assignment comes into play. And then we would choose IP pool, and then from here we would say the TN pool. But because of the fact that we don't have overlay connections in place, we're not testing overlay connectivity yet. We're not going to have an IP assignment attached to our host. That's why when you look over here on host 4 and you look at the TCP IP config, the VIBs are installed, but there's no IP address because we're not dealing with overlay transport communication yet. There's no Geneva encapsulation, no tunnel between the hosts set up in order to allow overlay communications. So I'm going to go ahead and say save because nothing really changed there. So DHCP is the default type, but because I'm not doing any overlay, and I've done this exact same thing where I do a specific VLAN transport zone, and we're in good shape. So the transport zones, if you wanted to create one, you would come to transport zones and you would create them. I'm actually going to go ahead and add a zone. I'm going to call this the overlay-tz and click on add. Just simple as that. There's really nothing more to it than that. I'm going to go ahead and refresh. You'll notice that the status is unknown for these guys, even if I refresh it a bunch of times. And the reason why it says unknown is because it's not being called by a node or a transport node profile. So I'm going to go back to nodes, and what I'm going to do is on DC1 comp cluster 1, I have 3 hosts, but they're in the wrong version of ESXi. I'm going to click here. I'm going to configure NSX, and the only way I can configure a cluster is if I use a transport node profile. I'm going to use a TN profile. I'm going to go ahead and click on apply. This will fail. So this will fail. This is not going to work, and it tells you right away that it's not going to work. If If you click inside of here, it'll tell you why it failed. It says failed to install software on host, invalid host type, or host not supported. Now that's not very obvious, right? Now you can click on resolve and resolve selected error. Yes, resolve. It's going to try, but it's still going to fail. Now again, I've already done the troubleshooting work for you. I know what the problem is. I know how to solve it. It's the wrong version of code. So we need to upgrade this cluster to a new to 6.7 update 3. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to pause, let it do its thing, and then we'll bring it back online, and then we'll continue doing our process. So I'm going to jump back over here on this cluster. I'm going to go to updates. We have 3 non-compliant baselines. I'm going to go to host updates. They're non-compliant. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to go to remediate. Now, what's interesting here is I accept the license agreement, and I'm going to click on OK. Now it's going to do a check. It says HA admission control will be disabled. So what should happen is these 2 VMs running here, Linux 1 and Windows 1, they should get moved to back and forth on host 1, 2, and 3 as they go back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and click on remediate. And so now it's going to take some time. So if I click on, say, Linux 1, that's on host 2. Windows 2 is on Linux 2 as well. So we'll see who goes into maintenance mode first. And that'll determine whether or not we need to vMotion. And because now it's going to enter maintenance mode. And, oops. So host 1 went into maintenance mode first. So it's going to do that. And that shouldn't affect any of the VMs. So I'm going to pause the video until that is completed, which should probably take about 10 or 15 minutes, give or take. And I will bring you guys back in. Now what you can do is while you're waiting on this is you can go ahead and do a refresh and try to install again, like on a per host basis. But to be honest with you, it's not really worth, the squeeze isn't worth the juice. So if host 1, let's say, finishes doing its thing, you can go back over here and try to install on host 1 again. Every once in a while you're going to run into a hang up. 99% of the time that you run into a hang up with deploying NSX-T to your ESXi host, it's a DNS issue. So what that means is if you were to look over here under any one of the hosts, let's say host 2, and go to TCP IP config, your DNS server should be listed right there, and you should have DNS entries for everything. I have NSX manager, I have my storage array, vCenter server, so on and so forth. Everything is located here. Now, the idea is if there's an issue, I should be able to do a lookup and find it. Now, I don't have a reverse lookup zone created, but I haven't had the need to deploy one. Every once in a while you'll need to, but it's only if you get a failure. So right now, host 1's getting remediated. It's doing the upgrade, and then once he's done, it'll continue going through. I will pause until the upgrade is done, and then while it's upgrading, I'll keep an eye on these 2 VMs and see where they move, just to prove to you that vSphere HA distributed resource scheduler kicks into play and will move the VMs around. As we figured, the VMs during the maintenance mode migration with the upgrade, we can see that Windows 1 is on ESXi 3 and Linux 1 is on host 1. So they load balance the traffic between host 1 and host 3. So just wanted to prove that that would work. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, the upgrades have been completed. So if we were to click on this, we can see that the upgrades are good. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. I'm going to go back over here to NSX-T, and I'm going to go click on this guy here, and I'm going to go say configure NSX-T again. We're going to say apply, and that's going to reattempt to install. And the funny thing about it is it says NSX install failed. So there are some actions that we can do. We can detach, transport, no profile, right? And we can reattempt applying it, configure NSX, Do that, see if that makes any difference. And there it goes. It's trying to do it now. So versus trying to, go through the repair path and do that. Now, if you had one host that was giving you a hard time, where, for example, you had NSX install failed on one host and you wanted to do the resolution, that's one way to do it. But at a bulk level, it's easier to pull the transport node profile off, put it up, reapply it, and then go from there. So we're going to let it do its thing, and then I'll come back in here in just a moment when it's all done. Alright, so all of our installations have completed, and we are in good shape. So we have the version of code we need. We come back over here, we can see that the access mode changed, and the NSX-T has now been installed on all of our hosts. If we look at the configure and then TCP/IP, we can see that everything is there that we needed to have. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is doing the base configuration of NSX-T on ESXi 6.7 update 3. So that was a lot. I understand that. So if you need to go through this video a couple times to pull all the information out, please do so. So that'll be some of the high-level details that you'll need to know in order to get everything up and running. So in the next video, we're going to talk about, I'm going to actually create a bunch of different virtual machines to do testing with, so that we can do a migration and see exactly what that looks like. Because like I said, the most common thing that I deploy are VLAN back segments to take advantage of the distributed firewall. So we'll take a look at exactly how that comes into play and all the good stuff that goes along with that. So if you have any questions, please leave a comment in the comment section below. If you haven't already done so, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch all of you guys in the next video.